Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. We are reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter number 4 entitled Transcendental Knowledge, and text number 19. Yasya sarve samarambam kama sankalpa varjitaha yanagni dhagda karmanam tam aho panditam buddha. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanim tam ahu panditam buddha. Yasya sarva samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanam tam ahu panditam buddha. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanam tam ahu panditam buddha. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanam tam aham puritam puriha. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanam tam ahu panditam buddha. Yasya sarve samarambha kama sankalpa varjitaha jnanagni dhagda karmanam tam aho panditam buddha. Yasya, of one whose, sarve, all sorts of, samarambha, attempts, karma, based on desire for sense gratification, sankalpa, determination, varjitaha, are devoid of, jnana, of perfect knowledge, agni, by the fire, dagda, burned, karmanam, whose work, tam, him, ahu, declare, panditam, learned, buddha, those who know. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Jai Sri Prabhupada. Translation. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavour is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Please repeat. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker, for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. Purport. Only a person in full knowledge can understand the activities of a person in Krishna consciousness. Because the person in Krishna consciousness is devoid of all kinds of sense gratifactory propensities, it is to be understood that he has burned up all the reactions of his work by perfect knowledge of his constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is actually learned who has attained to such perfection of knowledge. Development of this knowledge of eternal servitorship to the Lord is compared to fire. Such a fire, once kindled, can burn up all kinds of reactions to work. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandayaham Shri Guruhu Shri Yuta Parikamalam Shri Guruna Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrijatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namustate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Yasya sarve samarambha, kama sangalpavachitaha, jnanagni dagda karmanam, tam ahu panditam buddhaha. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. He is said by sages to be a worker, for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. So here Krishna is giving a description of one who has attained to this understanding, not only of freedom from reaction to the work, but also of his own position in relation to Lord Krishna. So in order to fully understand how we got here, what I'd like to do is just to go back and just go briefly through from the verses, some of the verses, picking out some points that are relevant to try and bring this thread together. So I'm going to start back at the verse we all know, verse 9. Janma karma chamedavyam evam yo vetitatvataha chaktva deham punarjanma naiti mam eti so Arjuna. So one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So here is where we begin, starting to talk about activities that are not part of the material world. Here Krishna is talking about his own activities, and he continues to talk about his own activities for several verses before he introduces the subject of, well, even here he says, one who knows this, upon quitting his body, attains my eternal abode. So this is the beginning of the discussion. If we know how Krishna's activities are transcendental, how Krishna is not bound by his activities, then we can also attain the same knowledge. And as Krishna says here, he attains my abode. In text 10, Vita raga bhaya krodha man maya mam uphasritaha bahavo jnana tapasa puta mad bhavam agataha. Being freed from attachment, fear and anger, being fully absorbed in me and taking refuge in the me, many persons in the past have become purified by knowledge of me, and thus they have attained transcendental love for me. So here Krishna is again making the point that knowledge of Krishna is purifying. And beyond the last verse, now he's saying because of their absorption and thinking about him, they attain transcendental love. So this is the time that Krishna explains this goal of transcendental love for those persons. And also there's a point that we'll come back to in another couple of verses. He talks about how many people in the past have achieved this. So it brings in the idea that we have to follow these great people from the past. Mahajano yena gata swapantaha. By our own efforts in studying the Vedas, we will not achieve any knowledge. We have to follow the path of the Mahajans. So in text 11, Krishna said, Ye yatamam prapadyante tams tateva prajamyaham. As they surrender unto me, I rewarded them accordingly. So this verse is describing how the people in this material world have different motivations, which is important as we go on a few verses later to discover karma, akarma and vikarma. Is these different motivations result in different types of activities and different types of reactions. So here Krishna is saying, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. So following the path means that Krishna has laid out this material world. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma says, Dharmauta papa nichayasrutayastapamsi Brahmadi kita pakata gavadastya jiva Yadata matra vibhava prakate prabhava Govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. So here Lord Brahma is describing how Krishna, Lord Govinda, has laid out the path of dharma and also the path of papa. The potency in both those paths, as well as the potency for every single jiva, from Brahma down to the meanest insect. So all these paths are laid out by Krishna. And in the very following verse in the Brahma Samhita, Yas twindra gopamata vendra mahosva karma bandhanu rupa pala bhajana matinoti karmani nedahati kintu chabakti bhajam govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. So here Krishna is saying that the fruits from our actions, the karma, is also laid out by Govinda, by Krishna, except for the devotees. He says, Nirdahati kintucha bhakti bhajam. For the devotees, this is coming today's verse, we might come back to this again later, the fruits of the reactions are burned up. As I say, it's the same expression is used. And Krishna uses the same again later in the 4th chapter. So, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. But according to their different motivations, the results are quite different. Then Krishna goes on to explain in text 12 about how those with fruitive desires will approach the demigods. And they will get results quickly, but the results are temporary and not valuable. So this is a description of karma. Karma is actually explained very nicely in the purport to this Brahma Samhita verse. We might come back to that later too. But karma is doing one's prescribed duties according to the Vedic injunctions. So this verse here, text 12, talks about karma kanda, and in text 13 we talk about varnashram, which may be karma and may be akarma. So in this karma kanda, people have personal motivations. So they approach the demigods. It's described like a business deal. When Krishna is talking about different types of relationships with the gopis, he describes this type of relationship when somebody will be nice to somebody only because they get something in return. He says this is actually the worst of the lot. It's even lower than somebody who's outright inimical, to be just pleasing someone in order to get something in return. That's in, I think, chapter 32 of the Krishna book. Krishna talks about the different types of... This is after the gopis challenge him for leaving them. And they say, there are different types of relationships in the world. And there are people who do nice things to nice people. There are people who do nice things whether the people are nice or not. And there are people who just don't do nice things for anybody. And they kind of imply, well, which one are you, Krishna? So in Krishna's reply, he breaks up their 3 classes out into about 8 or 9 classes by subdividing it. And but he says that this first class, who only do nice things when they'll get a response, is the worst of the lot. So this is the relationship with the demigods. We're in it only for our own benefit, and not there's no devotion in worship of the demigods. Although demons like Banasura is called a devotee of Shiva, and Shiva has a relationship with him, so maybe there are a few relationships. But generally people approach the demigods solely as a transaction. I will do what's prescribed in the Vedas and you give me what I want. So this is a perfect description of karma, which is activities prescribed in the Vedas, but they yield a fruitive result. So a pious result, but it's a binding result, and it results in repeated birth and death. So in text 13, Krishna said, Chaturvanyam maya shishtam guna karma vibhagashaha tasya kartaram apimam vidya kartaram avyayam. So this, according to the 3 modes of nature, the 4 divisions of human society are created by me. So varnashram is something that may be offered to Krishna, as we're directed in the 3rd chapter that sacrifices to Vishnu must be performed, and that actually the directions in the Vedas are meant to be offered to Vishnu in sacrifice. So if varnashram is performed in this mind as an offering to Krishna, it may be akarma. But if we perform varnashram for its sake only, then it may be karma. So varnashram, depending on our motivation, the same again, yayatam man prapajate. According to our motivation, we may be engaged in karma or akarma. And in the second half of this verse, he says, know that I am the creator of the system. You should know that I am the non-doer. And again in text 14, he says, there is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. So Krishna is introducing the fact that all of his activities, his transcendental activities, are what is called akarma. They are not fruitive activities. He's not doing them for personal gain, and he will not get any reaction for them. And he says, one who understands this truth about me also does not get entangled in the fruitive reactions of work. So by understanding that Krishna's activities are transcendental, are not motivated by desire, then a person can also follow. And in text 15, Krishna describes those persons who do follow. All the liberated souls in ancient times acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform your duty, following in their footsteps. So this brings us down to us personally, acting in a way that is not binding. By understanding Krishna's transcendental nature, his transcendental activities, we can also act in the same way. So text 16 just repeats the same. By understanding action and action, you will become liberated. So in text 17, Krishna introduces vikarma, forbidden action. He says, the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. So now we have three terms. Karma, which is action, which produces fruits. We have akarma, which is called inaction, which does not produce fruits, and vikarma, which is forbidden action. In text 18, Krishna tells us that we have to see inaction in action, and action in inaction. So we'll just spend some time explaining these three terms: karma, akarma, and vikarma. So karma is described as action in inaction. Somebody may not act, but if they are not purified, if they have not purified their mind and their desires, they will get a result for not acting. Krishna said earlier about the person who's a false renunciate, who may do nothing, but his mind dwells on the objects of the senses. And Krishna called him a pretender. So he gets a reaction because his mind is dwelling on the objects of his senses. Because we perform, we get reactions because of our thoughts, because of our speech, and because of our actions. All of these things will bring reactions. I was just, Srila Prabhupada was explaining it. I was just reading this book, The Matchless Gift. Srila Prabhupada was explaining how even he was giving the example that in America, if your dog barks, you might get arrested by the police. So this is interesting logic, but the dog is not subject to reactions because the dog is a dog. He's acting only according to his nature. But the dog's owner is subject to the reaction. So if you're in America and your dog barks, you might get arrested. It's called a sinful activity. The government might arrest you because your dog barks. Then he gives the example that bad speech is the same as the dog barking. It is also sinful. So in your thoughts, he said, even if you think of doing something bad, if you speak about something bad, or if you actually do something bad, then this will give bad reactions. He was giving the example that, of course, he was giving a material example of the law, and people may avoid the law. People might think they cannot be seen. I've done this and I can get away with it. But he was saying that doesn't work the same with God's law. because there are so many witnesses. He was explaining the daylight is the witness, the moonlight is the witness, and the ultimate witness is the super soul sitting in your heart, who is even permitting you to do these things, but he is the witness and he knows what you're doing. So in material law you may get away with things, but in God's law you can't. So this is karma. Whether we are acting or not acting, if our mind, if we're acting even through our mind, or through our thoughts, through our words, or through our actions, we are getting reactions for it. So vikarma is forbidden action. So karma is if you are acting according to the Vedic injunctions. Vikarma is if you're acting not according to the Vedic injunctions. So both karma and vikarma bring reactions. Karma, if you're acting according to the Vedic injunctions, you get good reactions, which is people do this type of activity to get a better life. They might want a good husband, they might want a good son, they might want a prosperous future, they might want to go to the heavenly planets. Or even like our video, they might not want to get hit by a bus. But generally their motivation is a little higher than that. So vikarma, one doesn't care about the injunctions. Srila Prabhupada has explained that generally the people who don't want to believe in God, they say there is no God because they don't want to follow the injunctions. So therefore their result is they will be degraded to the hellish conditions or to an animal life in their next body. They may be enjoying in this life because they've had good karma from previous lives. So they may be wealthy, they may get away with their misdeeds for some time, and they may look like they're being very successful at it. But they will get the result. As Srila Prabhupada was stressing, you can't hide from God's law. You may seem to be enjoying for some time, but this enjoyment will just turn to misery later. And then akarma. So akarma, somebody who follows Krishna in by not desiring fruits from their actions, will be engaged in all kinds of activities. And Krishna will explain that in another verse a little later. Next verse, I think. Oh, yeah, in the second half of this verse, 18. He says that the person who sees action in inaction and action in inaction. So in other words, if one is in a position to be able to understand these different types of activities and bondages, then one will come to the transcendental position by making the right choice. He is intelligent amongst men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. So here Krishna is stressing that this akarma, a person is engaged in all kinds of activities, but he gets no result for it. He's in the transcendental position. So that is nicely described also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 2, text, Chapter 3, Text 10. Akama sarva kamo va moksha kama udaradihi tivrena bhakti yogena yajete purusham param. A person who has broader intelligence, whether he be full of material desire, without any material desire, or desiring liberation, must by all means worship the Supreme Whole, the Personality of Godhead. So in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada nicely explains these different divisions. He's explaining that akama means no material desire. A living being is naturally part and parcel of the Supreme Whole. His natural function is to serve the Supreme Being, just as parts and parcels of the body, or limbs of the body, are naturally meant to serve the complete body. Desireless means, therefore, not to be inert like a stone, but to be conscious of one's actual position, and thus desire satisfaction only for the Supreme Lord. Jiva Goswami has explained this desirelessness, Bhajaniya Parama Purusha Sukha Matra Sva Sukhatvam, in Sandarbha. This means one should feel happy only by experiencing the happiness of the Supreme Lord. So this is the transcendental position. This is the position of one who is akarma, which means without desire, and it means his activities are akarma, which means they don't produce fruit. So Srila Prabhupada goes on to explain that karma with desires is the fruit of nectar. But moksha karma is also a type of desire. So those persons who desire liberation are also, they may have a type of desire. He said, if they desire liberation in order to become free from material miseries, then that's a desire. So it's fruitive. So in that way, actually to be akarma, to be without material desire, is actually only possible for the devotees. This is also described earlier in the second chapter in 259. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasopyasya paramdrishva nivartate. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, a taste for sense object remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So to become free from desire, it requires that one comes to the higher taste. One comes to desire Krishna's pleasure and not one's own. It's not possible to be free from desire. So therefore in our activities, we have to come to the point of freedom from the fruits of our activities. We have to come to this point of material desirelessness, desire only for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Krishna in many places also is telling us to engage in our duty for his sake only, for his pleasure. So that brings us back to today's verse. One is understood to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of desire for sense gratification. So this is the position of knowledge, and it's also the position of freedom from results. He is said by sages to be a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burnt up by the fire of perfect knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada, in his purport, is mostly talking about the fact that it takes a person in full knowledge before they can actually understand this person in Krishna consciousness. Because the activities may seem the same as a fruitive worker. So unless one understands that his motivation is different, unless one understands what is transcendental nature, then it is not possible to understand. Srila Prabhupada says only a person in full knowledge can understand the activities of a person in Krishna consciousness. It seems to me that the person in full knowledge is also in Krishna consciousness. I think they might be both the same type of people. It's only when you come to, because Krishna has already explained that this knowledge includes knowledge of his transcendental nature and activities. This is full knowledge, nature of his transcendental activities and knowledge of our position in relation to it. Because the person in Krishna consciousness is devoid of all kinds of sense gratificatory propensities, It is to be understood that he has burned up the reactions of his work by perfect knowledge of his constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He has actually learned who has attained to such perfection of knowledge. So this Srila Prabhupada is saying that it is the same. The person who knows his constitutional position is the one who's perfect in knowledge. Development of this knowledge of eternal servitorship to the Lord is compared to fire. Such fire, once kindled, can burn up all kinds of reactions to work. So Krishna actually restates this about the fire of transcendental knowledge in text number 37. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities. There is a quote very similar to this that is used in the Nectar of Devotion to explain how it is only devotional service that can burn up all our different kinds of reactions to sinful activities. Srila Prabhupada introduces this in the purport to text 37. Perfect knowledge of the self and super-self and of their relationship is compared herein to fire. This fire not only burns up all reactions to impious activities, but also all reactions to pious activities, turning them to ashes. There are many stages of reactions. Reactions in the making, reactions fructifying, and reactions already achieved. And reaction a priori. But knowledge of the constitutional position of the living entity burns everything to ashes. So this is explained by Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Devotion, that this verse, a verse that's almost the same as this in the Bhagavatam, is actually proving to us how devotional service can burn up all kinds of reactions. And then there is another verse which also talks about the fire of knowledge, which Rupa Goswami uses from the Padma Purana, which Rupa Goswami uses to show that devotional service also burns up the fire of ignorance. It burns up ignorance. So ignorance is the first cause of our sinful reactions. And then there's a cycle of sinful activities. There are sinful activities. You do sinful activities, and initially the reaction may not be manifest. And then it becomes manifest. And then if you engage in sinful activities, it becomes a cycle. Because simply engaging in sinful activities then makes you desire more sinful activities. So this propensity for sinful activities continues. So devotional service is the only thing that completely cut this cycle. It's described how this method of atonement that's described in the Vedas can get rid of your manifest reactions and even some of your unmanifest reactions, but it can't kill the propensity, the desire for sinful activities. And so that it's this description of how fire burns up all reactions shows that it burns up even the desire for sinful activities. And it's described, Ajamal is a very good example of this, because in the case of Ajamal, he had fallen from his position and become completely engaged in sinful activities. But by this act of calling out his son's name, Narayan, was sufficient devotional service to burn up all this sinful reaction from so many years. As a young man, he had fallen to this prostitute, and as a very old man, he called out his son's name and become delivered. So this is also given in Nectar of Devotion as proof of how devotional service is so strong that it can burn up all reactions to all sinful activities and all pious activities as well. So, do we have any comments or questions for today's class?